Greetings class, Dr. Williams here with video 1 of 3 on the theory of individual behavior. Let's begin. There's a lot of reasons why firms might want to understand people. People are the customers of most firms. The people buy the products. And people also work for the firms. Firms want to motivate workers to work hard. They want to motivate the buyers to buy a lot and to pay high prices. So economists can supply their theory of individual behavior. It might help managers understand people so that managers can exploit people to make higher profits. Remember, by the way, the goal of a firm is to maximize profits. Now, a lot of this theory comes from microeconomics, which is a branch of economics. So in this branch of economics, which was founded in the 19th century, economists said that the goal of a person is to maximize their happiness. The goal of a firm is to maximize profits, which can easily be measured because there are dollars coming in. Happiness is hard to measure. So in the 19th century, economists called happiness utility. You know, utility means usefulness. Like Batman's utility belt is very useful to Batman when he gets in a jam. So utility here means sort of usefulness. Total utility is the total cumulative happiness achieved by an individual. All the choices that we make add to our happiness. You can kind of imagine that a person has a counter, on their head that has a numerical value for how happy they are, and every time they do something, the counter goes up, and the cumulative effect of that is called total utility. And the idea is that people try to maximize this. This theory is a bit controversial, and there are more modern economists who say that people have different goals. Unfortunately, that's not in our textbook, but it would be an interesting topic. If you have any questions, you can post them in the discussion board. So, how do you maximize your happiness? Well, every decision has benefits and costs. The benefit would be the thing that adds to your happiness. The cost you can think of as an opportunity cost. By doing something, you give up the opportunity to do something else that might have also made you happy. So the benefit of doing something, in individual action, like eating a hamburger, or working 3 hours of overtime, or saving $20, the benefit is called marginal utility. This word marginal in economics that I'm trying to highlight here means incremental. And economists use this word marginal instead of incremental. I don't know why. Incremental is a better word. It's used in accounting. But when you see this word marginal, think about incremental. Something is adding to something else. So the benefit of doing something is how much it adds to your happiness. It's marginal utility. The cost is something you give up. It's an opportunity you give up. So if you eat a hamburger, you got to pay for it. And that means you can't buy something else that would have given you happiness. If you work an extra 3 hours, you give up the value of that time. Economists call any time that you're not working for pay leisure time. It doesn't mean you're goofing off. They just call it leisure. Anytime you're doing something not for pay. So you give up 3 hours of leisure time. And then the cost of saving 20 is, well, you can't spend the money now. So whatever you would have bought with $20, it's something that you give up. So if you want to maximize utility, you've got to do things with a high benefit cost ratio. That's the idea. You create this ratio, benefit divided by costs. And we assume both of these things can be measured. Of course, in the real world, it's sometimes difficult to measure these things. But you want this to be high. Something with a high benefit and a low cost is something that would be really good to do. If you could buy a BMW 750 IL for $1, that would have a lot of benefit and a low cost. On the other hand, if you had to spend $700 to buy one package of turkey hot dogs, that's low benefit and high cost, and you wouldn't want to do that. So benefit is marginal utility, and cost can be various things. But the idea, I spelled it wrong. The idea is you want this ratio, marginal utility over cost, to be high. So this is actually a difficult task for a human being. All of the options you have available, you have to analyze them all and look at the benefit-cost ratio of each one, the marginal utility over cost, in order to find the things that will absolutely maximize your total utility. Now, what types of choices might businesses be interested in that individuals make? I have 3 here. Of course, there are lots of other types of choices, but these 3 are important to managers. How much does an individual want to work? Generally, you want to motivate people who are good workers to work hard for you. How to divide income between spending and saving. If you're a bank, for example, you might want people to save a lot. If you're a consumer business like Amazon.com, you might want people to spend a lot. How much and what to buy now. As a business, you want to get the biggest chunk of people's income as you can. Now, these choices are all related. Deciding how much to work determines how much income you have, and that helps determine how much you spend and save, and that helps determine how much you buy. So if you really wanted to examine individual behavior carefully, you would look at all 3 of these things and integrate them. And that's how economists do it at the highest level. They have a theory of an individual that's integrated. But it can be very complicated, and the mathematics can be, you have these simultaneous equations and you have to solve them all simultaneously, and that's something that's not taught in this course. So instead of doing that, we're going to analyze each choice separately, as though it's unrelated to other choices. But it's a bit of a simplification when we do that. So in this first video, we're going to look at this first one, and then in the second video we'll look at the second one, and in the third video we'll look at the third one. So here we go. We're going to look at the first one. By the way, the order of these is not particularly important, but anyway. So let's look at this first one. How much to work? Work versus leisure. So you got to think again about the benefit of work versus the cost of work. You got to come up with, if you're starving to death and you need $10 to buy some food, and someone says, "Hey, come work for me, I'll pay you $10." I think you'd take it. If you just won the lotto and the same person says, "Hey, come work for me, I'll give you $10, I think you'll say no. So you got to think about that, right? The benefit of work is that you earn income to spend today, or if you don't need to spend it today, you can save it to spend another day. So this theory, there's no psychic benefit to work. You don't go to work because you like your job. It's kind of a sad theory in that manner, but the only reason you work is to earn income. And what's the cost of work? Again, there's this word leisure. Again, leisure doesn't mean you're goofing off. It doesn't mean you're really enjoying yourself. But you give up time that you could spend doing other things, not for pay. So leisure time is any time you're not working for pay. Sometimes these things are fun. You might go out and have a party or go watch a football game, but sometimes they're not necessarily fun. Sometimes spending time with the kids, I have 2 kids, is not necessarily fun. But it's something that's fulfilling. It's supposed to be fulfilling. Leisure time is supposed to be fulfilling in this theory. The work you don't get any fulfillment out of, you only get income. The leisure you get the fulfillment out of, but you don't get any income out of that. So that's the trade-off. Now, a very important thing that determines how much people work is the wage. Now, that's not the only thing, but that's the one thing we're going to focus on. This is something that the firm controls, for sure. Of course, there's also work conditions and things like that. In human resources management, you go into those things in much greater detail. But for our purposes, we're just going to look at the wage and how it affects how much people want to work. Now, here's how economists have looked at this. How does the wage affect how much people work? Well, there's these two opposing effects that occur at the same time that are unavoidable. You can't cancel, you can't get rid of one or get rid of the other. They always happen. It's kind of like the law of demand. You know, when you raise the price you sell of a product, there's a good thing and there's a bad thing. Suppose you're selling donuts and you raise the price of a donut from 50 cents to 75 cents. The good thing is you'll take in more money per donut. The bad thing is you'll sell fewer donuts. There's nothing you can do about that. The only thing you can do is try to figure out how big those two effects are and set the price that maximizes the net benefit to you. The same is true for workers. There's a thing called the wage income effect and another thing called the wage substitution effect. They both happen when the person's wage changes. You can't cancel one. You can't say one does not happen, the other one happens. They both happen, and they work against each other. They always work in opposite directions. Now, the wage income effect relates to how the wage, let me just put it exactly how I wrote it, relates to the number of hours required to achieve a desired total amount of wage income. In other words, the higher the hourly wage is, the fewer hours you have to work to earn a desired level of income. If you need to earn $100 and your wage is $20 an hour, you only have to work 5 hours. On the other hand, if you want to earn $100 and your wage is $10 an hour, you have to work 10 hours. So that's what the wage income effect is about. Now, the wage substitution effect relates to the reward to each additional hour of work as an incentive to work. If your wage is higher, each hour you work will result in more income that you could spend on something useful. So that would tend to make you want to work more. But if the wage goes down, that's less income you could spend on something useful, and that would tend to make the incentive to work go down. So these effects both occur. This seems to be very confusing to students. So I'm going to try to do the 4 ways that the wage income effect and the wage substitution effect, or the two ways that the wage income effect and the wage substitution effect can affect how much people work. I have 4 pages on this. 2 ways, 4 pages. That's what I was trying to say. So here's page number 1. Suppose the wage increases. See, this is something that you'd like to know as a manager. Hey, Jim here is a good worker. I'm going to raise his hourly wage. I hope he works more. Now, if Jim ends up working less, you've just shot yourself in the foot. You tried to get him to work more, but he worked less. Different people respond to changes in wages in different ways. And that's why it's important to understand. So here's the example. And again, all the examples we use are simplified from reality. So suppose you get to choose how many hours you work per week. It's a typo there. And your hourly pay just increased. What will you do? Will you work more hours or will you work fewer hours? Now, you specifically might know the answer for yourself, but each human is different. This is very important to understand. People do not all act the way you do. Now, you might wish that they did. Hey, look at the Democrats and the Republicans. You might say, how do they believe that over there? Well, they do. It's futile sometimes to try to change people's opinions. So there's two effects that affect each person when the wage goes up. The wage substitution effect and the wage income effect. So here's the wage substitution effect. This is about the reward to each additional hour of work. When your wage goes up, this goes up. Now if you work another hour, you can buy more with that. So this influences you to work more hours. But at the same exact time, also working in your brain, is this thing called the wage income effect. You can work fewer hours per week and still take home the same total weekly income as you did before your hourly pay was increased. So if your goal is to just make a certain amount of money per week and you get a raise in your hourly wage, you can cut back on how many hours you work. Think about people who miss their kids. They wish they could spend more time with their kids. They're having to work to make enough money to pay the rent and put food on the table. And now you give them a raise. They're like, thank heavens, I don't have to work as much. I can spend more time with the kids. That's what we're talking about with the income effect. So these effects both affect everybody. The only question is the extent. How big is this effect compared to this one? That's what's different in different people. Everybody has these effects in their head, but the question is, how big is each one? This is the same topic, the second page. If your wage goes up, the wage substitution effect encourages you to work more hours. The wage income effect encourages you to work fewer hours. The question is, how big is each effect? And that can vary by the person. I use an example when I teach this class face-to-face of a person who might want to become more fit. So they buy a treadmill and they are going to walk on this treadmill every day. But they find that it's so boring that the only way they can get themselves to walk on the treadmill is while they're walking on the treadmill, they munch on slices of bacon. So now you have this person walking on the treadmill and eating bacon at the same time. Will that make them healthier after they do that or less healthy? It depends on how big each effect is. There's the treadmill walking effect, which makes the person healthier, and there's the bacon eating effect, which makes the person less healthy. If the treadmill effect is greater than the bacon eating effect, the person will be healthier. But if the treadmill effect is smaller than the bacon eating effect, the person will be less healthy. So each person is different. Maybe one person can run for an hour on the treadmill and only eat one slice of bacon. For that person, that event is going to make them healthier. On the other hand, maybe another person walks at a really slow pace for only 5 minutes and has to eat 20 pieces of bacon at the same time. That person's bacon effect is larger than the treadmill effect, and they're going to be less healthy. Each person is different. So in other words, suppose you have a worker whose wage substitution effect is larger than the wage income effect. Then a higher wage will cause them to work more hours. That's usually the goal. On the other hand, if you have a person whose wage substitution effect is smaller, the wage will cause her to work fewer hours. So it's important to understand your workers. You don't want to do something and have an unintended effect, spend money and waste it. So that's what happens when the wage increases. The substitution effect encourages you to work more hours. The income effect encourages you to work fewer hours. And depending upon the relative magnitudes of each effect, the overall effect might be to have someone work more hours or fewer hours. Now let's look at the same concept, except think about kind of a less happy consequence. You're decreasing the wage. You might have to do this, or maybe you just feel like it as the employer. So again, the logic is exactly the same, but now the wage is going down instead of up. So now you get to choose how many hours you work per week, and your hourly pay just decreased. Are you going to work more hours or fewer hours? Well, the reward to each hour of work has gone down. So each hour you work will result in less income that you can spend on something useful. That would tend to make you work fewer hours. On the other hand, If you have to earn a certain amount of pay per week, let's say you have to earn a certain amount of pay just to pay your rent and keep food on the table and all that, and your pay is cut, you might actually have to work more hours so that you won't get thrown out of your apartment and your children won't be hungry and things like that. So the wage income effect means you have to work more hours to earn the same amount of weekly pay. So again, these two effects work in opposite directions. One makes you work fewer, one makes you work more. And remember, everybody is influenced by these. There's not a single person in the world who's only influenced by one. The only question is how big is each effect in each individual. So here's the same concept with some arrows. The substitution effect, because the reward for each additional hour income has gone down, the substitution effect encourages you to work fewer hours. The income effect encourages you to work more hours, because you'd have to work more hours to make the same total weekly amount of pay. So again, each person is different. Some people have a substitution effect bigger than an income effect, and some people have an income effect bigger than a substitution effect. Look at it this way. For a workaholic, the substitution effect is generally bigger than the income effect. For someone who values spending time at home, generally the income effect is bigger than the substitution effect. So again, if the substitution effect is larger, a lower wage will cause a person to work fewer hours. On the other hand, if the substitution effect is bigger, a lower wage will cause a person to work more hours. Now, this is a summary page of what the last four, what we just did, okay? This is a concept that you really have to understand. To try to memorize it, well, I suppose maybe your brain works better than mine. But these are the types of things that if I don't understand them, I can't really memorize them. Maybe you can. But the point is, everybody is affected by these. It's just a matter of how big one effect is compared to the other one. And you need to understand your workers. You might do something that you regret, that you want it to have a certain effect, but it had the opposite. Now I have an example of these unintended consequences. And this example comes from my wife, who is the assistant controller, at least maybe she'll get a promotion, but as I record this, she's the assistant controller at an apartment management company. And the owner of the apartment management company, who's also the CEO, decided that he would increase the commissions that leasing agents make for every apartment leased. By the way, before I met my wife, I didn't realize that leasing apartments was kind of like selling cars, and these leasing agents were commission-based, and there was all kinds of tricks and gimmicks they use. I understand that now. You got to be careful when you try to lease an apartment. But anyway, the CEO thought that all of these leasing agents were like him. He was thinking that if he was a leasing agent and the commission went way up, that he would work his butt off because he'd be making so much more money for each apartment leased. But here's the thing. What he found out after only a month of doing this was the exact opposite occurred. The leasing agents did not have the same motivation as him. What they thought was, well, I was leasing, 5 apartments a week. Now I only have to lease 3 a week, and I can take home the same total amount of pay each week. So they actually leased fewer apartments. So this desire to motivate somebody by increasing their pay backfired in this case. Now in other cases it might not backfire, but you have to know your workers. See, this is the income effect, right? You don't have to work as hard, because and you can still take home the same amount of pay if you get a pay hike. That was the dominant effect among his leasing agents. He was thinking the dominant effect would be this: the amount you earn per lease is so huge that you're going to want to break your something or other in order to lease a lot of apartments to make a lot of money. So let me go back. So we've done this first one. Now we have to do number 2 and number 3, but the video is already 25 minutes long. So we're going to have a second video to do number 2 here. So until that, this is Dr. Williams saying, have a good day.